US-China tensions are set to take centre stage when the United Nations General Assembly convenes in the next hour. This year's meeting takes place under the spectre of COVID-19 forcing most delegates to gather in virtual session. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping will both be speaking.
The opening of the UN General Assembly will be a quiet affair. World leaders kept home by the pandemic will be delivering their speeches virtually. One of the first leaders to speak is Donald Trump, who could lay out his vision for America's relationship with the UN if he's re-elected in November. The US leader has hinted that he has a strong message for China as tensions between the two superpowers hit an all-time high. Chinese leader Xi Jinping will speak just minutes after Mr. Trump. He has sent this video message to mark 75 years of the UN.
当今世界正经历100年未有之大变局，突如其来的新冠肺炎疫情对全世界是一次严峻考验。面对新形势、新挑战，我们必须严肃思考，世界需要一个什么样的联合国？在后疫情时代，联合国应该如何发挥作用？
In contrast, Mr. Trump yanked support from the UN's World Health Organization after the pandemic began, calling it a puppet of China.
Simon Marks is live in Washington, D.C. for us. Good morning, Simon. Well, both of these leaders are going to deliver their speeches just minutes apart. We know that Donald Trump in the past, he's taken aim at China before. He now says he's going to send another strong message. Are we expecting a repeat?
I think it may be a repeat. He may go even further than what he's done before, Dawn. We know that President Trump's speech to the United Nations was recorded yesterday. This isn't being delivered live. It doesn't even appear on the daily schedule that the White House has distributed relating to the president's activities. And shortly after he recorded it, he left the White House last night to head off to a campaign event in Ohio. And he told reporters who asked him about the speech that he had been very tough on China. Now, President Trump has never held back in his previous addresses to the United Nations General Assembly. Remember that the United Nations is not a body for which he has an especially warm place in his heart to begin with. And in the aftermath of the events of the last year and the arrival of COVID-19 on American shores and on shores all over the world, this is going to be President Trump's first opportunity before the world body and a global audience, perhaps to explain in more detail about the accountability that he has argued China needs to face for COVID-19. He's never really gone into detail about what he means when he says that China must be held accountable, although on one occasion he's indicated that he supports the views advanced by German Chancellor Angela Merkel that should include some degree of financial accountability for economies that have been damaged by the pandemic. It's possible he will go into more detail on that in this speech, but we know very little about the content of this speech. There's been no opportunity for reporters to get briefed by administration officials here as to precisely what the president plans to say. But look, Donald Trump is not a man who has ever held back in speeches, whether it's to the United Nations General Assembly or any other body. And I think it's going to be a very interesting moment when that video starts to roll.
Yeah, Mr. Trump hasn't been a big fan of the UN either from day one, Simon. A sharp contrast to China's support for the organization.
Well, I think you're going to hear a jarring contrast between the messages that Donald Trump presents and President Xi Jinping presents, because the Chinese leader, not just over the last few days, but over the last few months, has been pushing an argument in favor of multilateralism. He urged European Union nations just last week in a leaders' summit that was held virtually to partner with China and find a multilateral approach, not just to battle battling COVID-19 but to other issues, those cadences were met with some considerable scepticism in Europe. But definitely Beijing has continued to indicate in the run-up to President Xi's speech later today that once again a call for multilateralism will be at its core, whereas Donald Trump's approach more broadly to foreign and international policy has been, as we all know, to pursue more of an isolationist stance, and certainly not to embrace the multilateralism that the United Nations, by its very existence, symbolises. So there's going to be a substantial contrast there. And also remember that the United Nations is a body where world leaders just a couple of years ago laughed at President Trump when he maintained that he had done more in the first year of his administration than any other president. They've never laughed at President Xi publicly on the floor of the United Nations General Assembly. So both of these men have very different approaches to this body.
Yeah, well, thanks for that update. Simon Mark speaking to us from Washington, D.C.